morning, everyone. I'm Jan Blanchard with PCC's Pediatric Solutions Consulting Team, and it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce to you a team of wonderful folks that are working on our QB-CDE solution to present to you a session called Getting Started with Clinical Document Exchange. Dan Gillette, Scott Kirby, and Sasha Pavlovich will lead you through almost an hour's worth of training, details, good stuff. You're going to be really excited by the stuff you see. I will turn this over to them to begin their presentation. Over to you, guys.
Hello. My name is Dan Gillette. I'm the software designer here at PCC. I've been working on the Clinical Document Exchange project as a whole for quite a while now, coming up on perhaps over 2 years. And I'm excited to lead off and talk a little bit about what Clinical Document Exchange is, and hopefully prep the stage for my colleague Sasha, who will walk you through some of the initial training that you'll be receiving as well. All right. So as Jan mentioned, there is the live session in UC Chat. Looking forward to seeing all of the questions and comments that you folks have about the Clinical Document Exchange. So what are we looking to do today? By the end of the day, we'd like you to know what Clinical Document Exchange is all about. We'd like you to know what information from your practice is being shared. And finally, we'd like you to know what you need to do to get started with Clinical Document Exchange if this whole idea tickles your fancy. To start off on the most high level thing, what is Clinical Document Exchange? How does it work? Who can get my patient's documents? What kind of documents can be received? Is it anything that I've scanned in? We'll talk to all of that. To start off though, we're gonna see how does this work and what is it? And the best way that I really can explain what this is all about is with a little anecdote. Not true, but it certainly could be. This is Evie. She's a pretty happy kid. She loves to go on adventures and play around, get dirty. But you know, one day, Evie got hurt, and not really, I should say that, not really. And she had to go to the hospital. Now, luckily, Evie's pediatrician uses PCC EHR, and the hospital was able to retrieve Evie's medical records from her pediatrician just as soon as she got checked in. So everything that Evie has going on for her in terms of problem list or medication allergies or current medications, all the way through her immunizations and vitals history were immediately accessible to the hospital so that they could provide quick and high quality care. So after the visit, the pediatrician was notified that Evie had gone to the hospital. So having gotten this call from Evie's parents, the doctor was able to retrieve a record of Evie's visit without having to log into the hospital's EHR or wait for the hospital to send the visit summary over either via direct secure message or fax. Which meant that the office was able to get Evie scheduled for her follow-up visit the very next day. They have a very open schedule, thankfully. And the record of Evie's hospital visit, again, including all of the relevant information from it, was able to be brought over to PCC EHR and is visible in her visit history to maintain that complete list of Evie's medical records. So again, as I mentioned, that's a quick little fake anecdote, but something which very much is within the realm of possibility for what Clinical Document Exchange can do. So really what it is it is a system of standards for publishing, cataloging, and sharing clinical documents. Clinical documents, just to be clear, is generally defined as anything which is related to the patient's clinical history, but usually means CCDAs. This system of standards allows those documents to be available for retrieval by authorized parties. That's a very important thing, authorized, across the healthcare ecosystem. The other interesting thing is that it is very much being retrieved rather than being sent. So it's not an email, it's not like direct secure message. It is you reaching into their system to get the documents yourself. So how does it work? That sounds pretty cool. So on the one hand, you got the organization seeking documents. On the other hand, you got the organization that has the documents. And so it's kind of a conversation. Step one is to make sure that the organization that has the documents knows who your patient is. So you ask, and you get a few different types of responses. No, or yes, we know exactly who this is, or yes, but it could match a couple of our patients. So in any case, assuming you get a yes, you then need to say, great, what documents do you have available for my patient? And the answers here could be, hey, here's a really cool list of everything that we have available, or we don't have anything ready for you to be retrieving. Assuming again that they have documents, the third phase of the conversation is the request. Hey, these are the documents that I want to download from your system, and the responding system then says, great, here are those documents, and they are downloaded. So it's a nice little friendly conversation. And I'm going to introduce some of the terminology which we use frequently here in conjunction with clinical document exchange. And that's the concept of the initiator. That's our folks here on the left, the organization seeking documents, and the responder. That's the practice over on the right. Now, as you may have seen in some of the marketing emails that have gone out, PCC has already completed the responder role. Again, that's this chunk over here on the right. That is ready for anybody to use who is interested. With the release, which is coming out next, 8.13, we are entering into the pilot phase for the initiator, which means that after we shake this out and find the bugs, hopefully all the bugs, we'll be moving that out of pilot into general consumption as well. So very exciting things coming up. The next big thing is who can retrieve documents from our practice. Of course, a huge level or a huge item to be sure about, because you don't want just anybody with an iPhone taking your patient's protected health information. So it's only carry quality enabled organizations. That means a healthcare organization that has gone through the vetting process to become a part of the carry quality network. The vetting process is pretty intense. You have to have multiple references stating that you are who you say you are and that you are a legitimate healthcare organization. And then finally, PCC at this point has made a conscious decision to only allow your patient's records to be retrieved for purposes of treatment by another healthcare organization. That means an insurance company couldn't say, hey, I want to see what else is going on with this patient. Let me go see what ABC Pediatrics knows about them. I've mentioned carry quality. We should talk a little bit more about what they are. They are a subsidiary of the Sequoia Project, which is a nonprofit. And what they've done is, rather than creating a network of connected practices, healthcare organizations, they've defined a framework, a set of standards that allows participating entities to exchange documents. Basically, everything is in there. There's a directory of places that you can communicate with, your system can communicate with. And the system of standards means that you can just connect to those people with no additional configuration or setup required. PCC is a care equality implementer. That basically means we are the front for you guys. Any PCC clients who participate are known as a care equality connection. You're under our umbrella. And I believe this is where I pass it on to my colleague Sasha, who is going to walk you through a whole bunch of more in-depth information about clinical document exchange.
Well, hi there, folks. As Dan already mentioned, my name is Sasha, and I'm a member of INRA implementation team here at PCC. Prior to that, I was in support for about 3 years, and just for like the last year and a half, almost 2 years, I've been with the implementation team. Thank you, Dan, for doing such a great introduction here. As I already mentioned, I'm going to cover things that you will be seeing and things that we'll need to talk about, what needs to be happening and what you need to do when it comes to the actual PCC EHR, and items that we'll need to cover, and what parts of configuration we will need to do together once you decided to onboard with this fantastic new tool that we developed. So to start off, I do want to mention that we have decided as a company to use this presentation and this training as part of the onboarding process. So if you're a client watching this and not one of the PCCers, because I know there are a few, we're essentially going to treat this as you already completed a set of training. That way, when you are in fact ready and decided to go live with clinical document exchange, you don't necessarily have to do another training. Normally, my team, myself and Jen Merriman and Rami Palmer, we would normally do these for about an hour with our clients who want to go live. Again, we're more than happy to do this again, but since you're here and once you decided to go and get enabled with CDE, please just mention to your client advocate that you participated today's course. So that necessarily you don't have to do it again, unless of course you want to. Again, I just wanted to make that clear so you guys are aware of that. And at this point, I'm actually going to move over to the slide part of this presentation. And I do wanted to talk about a little bit what kind of documents do we make available once the retrieval request has been initiated. As you can see here on my slide, we provide is one summary of care document, and that is the most recent and up-to-date document that gets ready for retrieval. At any point there's a change made to any of these contents that you see on my slide, that would be allergies or problem list or patient demographics, PCC EHR will automatically update that document. So the next time there's a request initiated, we will be providing the most up-to-date document to again to any third-party organization who is part of the care quality network. And so that is the documentation that does get transmitted. Patient consent in PCC EHR, and what does this mean? So in order for a practice to share these documents, we do have to have some set of rules in place, right? And that is the patient consent, of course. Does the patient want to do this? Are they okay with with his or her documents being shared by a number of these different entities? Well, we have to talk about this. We have to come up and determine what is the actual consent policy for your practice. Keep in mind that a lot of these policies also vary from state to state, so they're different. But there's a little bit of research that will need to be done at your part before we determine the status for all of your patients. So how many statuses are there? In generally speaking, there are two different consent policies or statuses for that we use. Very first one here is the opt-in. And what does the opt-in actually mean? Well, if you are in fact determined that your practice and that your state is in an opt-in state, meaning the patient data will be shared only if and when a patient has given explicit consent. Again, so you will not be by default, you will not be able to share any documents unless you have that explicitly stated by your families and by your patients. The second consent policy, or the other option, I should say, is the opt-out policy. So a patient's data will be shared unless or until the patient explicitly revokes that consent, meaning that at any point as a practice, if you do decide to go as an opt-out policy, you can go ahead and start transmitting or sharing your patient's documents, unless, of course, if they decide to that they're not okay with that at that point. I would say that opt-in versus the opt-out, or generally talking about or speaking of the consent policy, is a pretty heavy subject as far as on the practice side. You guys really do need to consult with your multifunction attorney or your legal counsel, and really do some extensive research on what are the actual state-specific laws and requirements for your practice. I know that a lot of times the federal regulations and laws are a little different than the state, and that is one of the reasons as to why we PCC really encourage you that this is something that you really spend a lot of time looking at before making a decision. And of course, there's always a status of, or a third option, which is the undetermined status. And I will talk about that in just a couple moments here. So, you did a little bit of, research, you figured out your consent, you know exactly what is going on. You do have your consent, forms ready. Let's say you contact your client advocate, and in a way you're ready to move on. And great, that's all sounds good. But, what do you do? How do I change and how do I edit the patient consent policy in PCC EHR? So at that point, you do have to realize that the only way that the documents will be shared with other entities and third-party organizations that are part of the care quality network will be if the patient's consent status is set to yes. If the patient status is either set to undetermined or to no, of course, those records will not be shared. So you can, in fact, treat the undetermined status and a status of no to your safe bets. So if either one of those are exactly the same, the only way the patients in the documents will be shared if the patient's consent is set to yes. I do want to say that if you are a practice who, let's just say you really haven't had a time to do all this research, you haven't reached out to anyone, but you do in a way want to start with onboarding process. So, but how do you, what do you do is that you can't just necessarily pick one. And like, all right, I'm going to go with opt-in or the opt-out status. By default, PCC will enable your practice, if you decided to do so, with a status of undetermined for all of your patients. So meaning that once the discussion is complete and we're both parties in agreement that you should move forward, we can certainly set you up with the status of undetermined for all of your patients in your practice. And then at that point, you will just need to start slowly collecting that consent policy on a per patient basis. So again, I always wanted to let you know there's always an option. Again, I do recommend, and we do recommend that you certainly follow up and really determine what is the actual policy for your state, and more importantly, what is the policy for your practice. Once on board and once enabled, once the clinical document exchange is turned on, and again, this is the responder role, the initiator role. This is something that's coming down later on, as Dan mentioned earlier. Once we PCC have everything turned on, what we'll be seeing, and again, this is in the patient's chart crosswide, as we'll be seeing the new component, which will be under communication preferences. So if you open up a patient's chart, as seen here on this slide, there will be a brand new component called clinical document exchange. So what you're seeing here in this example is a practice who has a status set to undetermined, right? So let's just pretend that this is how we enabled it from the get-go. And at this point, this patient came in and, we're asking a parent for their consent policy, and if they want to participate or not, and how do they want to do this. In order to make that change, you will simply choose edit. Once you choose edit, then you will see the 3 different statuses. First one will be, of course, checked off by default, and then you have yes or status of no. You make your change here, you click on one of the statuses and click save. And at that point, let's say hypothetically speaking that if we change the status to yes, that means the patient is opted out, and we can go ahead and start sharing their documents. All right, and at this point, I'm going to go in my next slide. Patient also, you can also set that your patient consent policy on your own by the practice. So again, by default, if there's no action taken, as I already mentioned, PCC will set up all your patients in the entire practice onto an undetermined status. But let's just say that you've done all of this research you needed to do, all the work has been in place, and you are in fact in the opt-in state. And at that point, you need to get a consent from each and every patient. You can certainly change the setting on the practice level, where that once you get enabled by PCC, by us, we set everyone to automatically to a status of no, for example, in this case. So in order to do that, you can change this under practice preferences simply by opening the practice preferences and choosing one of these 3 options. Once you make that change, you don't have to necessarily worry about going forward. Again, that would be the same if it's an opt-out policy. So if your state is an opt-out, you decided to go with that policy, you can certainly come in here, change everyone to yes. So that way, when we get you guys enabled, everyone will be going with the status of yes. Again, pretty important to keep that in mind. And again, you can change that under practice preferences as you wish. Another cool thing that we can do here is that we're giving you actually an option. If you are wanting to collect a patient consent status ahead of time. So this means that you're in the process of maybe figuring out your consent. What is the policy? What is the consent policy for your practice? You're not really sure. Again, you're not quite ready to go live, right? So you're not quite ready to get this turned on, but you're getting there. One of the things that you can do, you can actually start gathering the consent policies ahead of time. So meaning that if you go under the protocols in component builder, if you go to chart by component and select communication preferences, you can enable this before you're live. So if you follow these directions here, so if you certainly go to protocol component builder, chart by component, communication preferences, and a window will pop up with 3 different options. Well, actually 2, and then the included clinical document exchange consent is a brand new checkbox that is now applied. So that box will obviously by default come up empty. You would check that box, you would save that, and at this point, you can actually start gathering that consent from your patients and your families without even before your practice is live with clinical document exchange. You certainly have that ability to. And then you would also determine what is the status that will be for all other patients, for newly added patients after that. And again, once you give us that, we'll make sure that is the things that will happen after you go live. So I highly encourage folks to think about also using considering this option here, because it is quite handy, especially if you want to go with the especially if you don't really know, and if you end up in that undetermined status, this gives you a little bit more time to gather the status on a per patient basis as they're coming in your practice. Security. So I have to say that a clinical document exchange is obviously very secure as point of looking at it from the PCC perspective. The information is directly shared, and again, we've done everything that we can on our end to encrypt all the data, and that based on the care quality standards. So, there was a lot of work that has been applied and done here to make sure that this data, the patient data, is protected as safely as possible. Now, of course, if you ever think about that, there is anything that you might feel that it might potentially be a data breach, obviously we highly recommend that you please contact your client advocate right away, so that information can be passed on, and that we can intervene as soon as possible. But looking at it from our side, we have done all the necessary work in order to protect your data. All right, so what are the next steps, right? So as I already mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, you can use this if you're a PCC client watching this. You can use this as part of, consider that your training has been complete, right? So you're all set with that part. The next step would be, obviously, as I mentioned, I talked about it for the most part, is the practices consent policy. That is extremely important that you know this ahead of time before you're ready to contact your client advocate to let them know that you would like to go ahead and get on the onboarding process with clinical document exchange. I would also highly recommend, and this is what I've done with a few beta clients, because we do have 5 or 6 clients who are actively using, or who are actively using the clinical document exchange right now as we speak. And I believe 5 out of those 6 practices do have a consent form that it has been placed on their system that they print for each and every time the patient does. Every time the patient comes in and they have a consent in place, they have the patient or mom, of course, or father sign in that form, and that gets later scanned into their chart. So I definitely would be happy to see all of you guys definitely considering having a form for this. And again, once you have this form set up, please give us a call. We, PCC, can easily add this to your force component, as most of you guys already know that. And obviously, lastly, we will need to confirm when is a good time for us to get you enabled, if in fact we have everything else in place and you are 100% ready to go. Another thing that I do want to mention about clinical document exchange, again, this is a responder role, so we're only responding to those requests. The initiator role will be coming down in the near future. There really is no work, right? So a lot of these things are happening in the background. Besides coming up with a consent form on your end and trying to figure out what your consent policy is for your practice, and more importantly, in state, so that we make sure you're not breaking any laws and you're doing everything in order. Really, once you have those 2 pieces in place, everything else happens in the background automatically. So the request comes in from a hospital, the computers do the talk, and the data gets exchanged. Again, there is no intervention as far as on your level, besides updating the patient consent policy and patient chart. I would say that's definitely something that your practice will need to do on a daily basis. We do have some resources added in here for you guys that you can review, that you may find beneficial in your case once you wanted to start doing a little bit more research. And I do have some examples as well for the consent form in that case. So on my next slide, I do want to show some examples. Again, this is just a verbiage. This is not, we're not saying use this, but this is just more of an idea as to what you can do if for a consent form that you might think about creating for your practice. Again, as highlighted in here on purpose, we do highly recommend that you check with your legal team before coming up with this policy. Again, because you do want to make sure that you stay compliant. Again, so if your practice is not PIN, we do have an example as to what you can maybe possibly use, or if you want to stick with the opt-out policy, you can use the example here, or the verbiage that we have provided on this slide. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just an idea as to what you can do with that. Don't believe that there's anything else that I should mention. I think I've covered all the basics. I think the more important stuff, of course, we'll be always more than happy to discuss or give you more details. If you simply just reach out to PCC or your client advocate, of course. Oh, actually, no, I'm wrong. There is one more thing that is pretty important too. So during your research, and let's say you're in the stage where you're still trying to figure out, but is this maybe going to work for you? Maybe there are no care quality organizations in your area, or maybe they are. Maybe you don't know who they are. The care quality site does actually have a great tool where you can try to search for all active and care quality enabled sites in your area, or perhaps in the entire country. So let's just pretend that you're maybe in the state of California. You wanted to see maybe who's around you, who's actually part of the care quality network. Are there any hospitals or any other offices that might be looking to get those records transmitted or pulled from you? You can simply use this tool to do so. Again, as shown here, an example, you have search by state. I would narrow it down to maybe a zip code, city. I mean, again, options are very there, so you will just have to modify your search based on what works well for you. I've definitely used this a few times for our beta clients, as I mentioned, as we have 5 or 6. I found it very, very handy, and I was able to give an idea to those clients as to who was in their area that they could potentially work with. So again, this is, I believe, also shared in the handouts, so you guys will be able to save this on your desktop and use this as for your information. So again, please, if there are questions, please post them on the live session channel for the UC chat, and we'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions. I'll do my best to answer these questions. I am lucky and fortunate to have Dan with me, as well as Scott Kirby, who is the developer who has been working on clinical document exchange, and who's got plenty of knowledge as far as on the technical side of things. So if you do have questions, anything implementation wise, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. Anything that may be related to the technical side of things, we do have Scott who may be able to jump in for us.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Sasha. This was really awesome. And thank you, Dan. This I really particularly love the heads up that you gave about things that even like long before you're up and running with connections like this, the prep work that you can do. So all of I found it really useful, that information about, getting your policy prepared, getting your patient's options, the opt-in, opt-out preferences, getting that worked out and gathering those preferences even before you need them. It's never too early to start asking questions like that. We did get one question from an attendee, and that question is, can a practice participate with more than one exchange?
Hi there. So again, this is Sasha here again. So if I understood the question correctly, meaning can the more than one organization request documents to be, as long as they're part of the care quality network, they can certainly be more than one.
Yeah. The way I interpreted that was slightly different, asking if a single practice could participate with more than one exchange. So could they be care quality participants, and are there other exchanges that they might be able to participate with?
I'm not 100% sure on that question, but I think Dan might be able to answer that, Jan.
Okay.
Hey, this is Dan. So just to talk about that a little bit, right now, the only exchange that PCC is working with in this context, in the clinical document exchange, is Care Equality. That being said, the other large clinical document exchange networks, those being Commonwealth Health Alliance, as well as the National Health Exchange, those are actually both already Care Equality connections or Care Equality implementers. I believe last I'd heard, at least with Commonwealth, they were still working out all of the technical details about how information passes from one exchange to the other exchange, and how all of the, the patient patient information is passed along there. But that was a little while ago that I last looked into it. So basically, by being a part of the care equality framework, you should get access to a whole bunch of stuff. In addition to that, other care equality implementers include some health HIEs, health information exchanges, which may include your state exchange as well.
Awesome. That definitely addresses what I think the question was. I don't see any other questions. Let me double check one last time so we don't leave anybody hanging. Yeah, I believe that was the sole question here. This was a huge amount of information, and it looks like it was a ton of work. Thank you guys so much for this. It makes a lot of sense of something that was a bit of a black box to me before. And thank you all again. I really appreciate the work that you put into this great session. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.